Hi everyone, my name's John. Welcome back to my channel. I recently read a book I wanted to talk about. I read this with Angie from the Historathon Discord, one of my friends over there. We read things together all the time. And we read this. This is a book by Hetta, and it's called Poet, Mystic, Widow, Wife: The Extraordinary Lives of Medieval Women, specifically for medieval women. And I'll get into that in a second. It's a short little book, 200 pages. Christine de Pizan was spurred on by the rank misogyny of her time and the rank misogyny in a book she was reading, in which a medieval cleric and Latin poet by the name of Matthiolus was complaining that women do nothing but make men's lives miserable. And she decided not simply to sigh and turn the page, she used it as fuel to write a rebuttal, her now famous Book of the City of Ladies, in which she constructs a sort of allegorical city built and occupied by women that show that women have been courageous and virtuous all throughout history. Christine is just one example in Hedda House's new book, Poet, Mystic, Widow, Wife, which came out from the University of California Press in 2024. And it is kind of a quadruple biography that also includes the lives of the mystic Julian of Norwich, the English mystic, Marjorie Kemp, who was kind of a mystic in her own right, and the poet Marie de France. This book kind of sits at the crossroads of medieval social history, which I love, and literary criticism, which I also have a soft spot for. And Howe uses these four lives as a kind of jumping off point to look at broader themes in medieval women's history, including marriage, travel, childbirth, work, and religious life. So we start off with Marie de France. She is the poet of the title, and so named Marie de France because we think she was born in France but was associated with the court of Henry II in England toward the end of the 12th century. And she wrote these long narrative poems called lays, Lais, in a vernacular tongue, Anglo-Norman. And because she wrote in a vernacular language instead of the Latin that you might expect that she wrote in, she was able to teach her aristocratic audience about the hot new literary trend of the time, which is the art of the troubadours, courtly love. In solidifying the literature of chivalric romance, Marie de France wrote poetry without easily identifiable moral solutions that emphasized the experiences and emotions of women, not just men, often flipping the whole damsel in distress motif on its head. And after negotiating a celibate marriage to be a fly on that wall, right? Marjorie Kemp, who is the next figure, she's the wife in the title of the book, by the way. She set aside an ordinary life of a medieval woman to pursue pilgrimages all over Europe and even Western Asia. Jerusalem, Santiago de Compostela, Germany, the Baltic, all without her husband. All without her husband. Her religious fervor, which included uncontrollable sobbing, relentless religious talk, and incessant preaching, so annoyed her fellow pilgrims that they bullied her often, stole her supplies, and forced her to wear shameful clothing, and even abandoned her on one or two occasions just to get her to shut up. It's Kind of funny, also kind of sad, but she is she's a fascinating person to read about. After returning from her travels, she dictated her life story, which she called the Book of Margery Kemp, around the year 1430, and in doing so, she became the first person, not just the first woman, but the first person to ever write her autobiography in the English language that we know of. We know precious little about Julian of Norwich, who is the mystic of the title. We don't even really know her real name, to be honest. She confined herself to an intense regimen of fasting, prayer, and self reflection. She walled herself into a cell of about no more than 100 square feet with only three small windows, one to exchange food and waste, one to receive communion, and one for the occasional visitors, of which she had a few. Around the year 1413, during one of her many journeys, Margery Kemp actually met Julian and asked her for advice and validation about her own religious experiences. And Julian provided her with positive reinforcement and told her to keep on with what she was doing. We don't know when she wrote her famous book called Revelations of Divine Love, but Julian too contributed one of the enduring works of the medieval canon, certainly when it comes to theology. Revelations of Divine Love is probably the first book written by a woman and the earliest surviving work written by an English anchorite. Christine de Pizan, who is the widow of the title, was born in Venice and moved to France as a young girl, so her father could become the court astrologer to King Charles V of France. Like Marie de France, she received a superb education because her father encouraged her learning, wanted her to not only read and write, but go much, much further than that, and she did. At the age of 15, she married her husband, whose name was Etienne, and 10 years after they got married, he ends up dying of plague, leaving her alone to support their children and her mother, all by herself. She picked up her pen and she starts writing these love ballads, which caught the attention of aristocratic patrons. She oversaw the copying and production of her own books, making her maybe one of the first women in Europe to support herself solely through the means of her own writing. House's claim about these women isn't too controversial, I think. They led lives that challenged the social norms of their time, especially the gendered social norms of their time. They were not the passive, oppressed figures of what you might think a medieval woman is, but they were vital, active participants in their intellectual and spiritual worlds. And while it wasn't common for women to travel independently like Margery Kemp did, or earn money like Christine de Pizan did, or write their own autobiographies, they forged unusual paths on their own. What Hetta House doesn't really emphasize are the opportunities and privileges these four women often had to make their decisions in the first place. Marie de France received an education that would have made most literate men of her age blush. She was a known quantity at the court of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, where, like I said, she wrote lays about courtly love, and where she certainly used her literary talent to secure her reputation and patronage. Margery Kemp was born to a wealthy merchant family where her father had been a mayor and a member of parliament. While she did bear an incredible 14 children, she afterward lived a chaste life with her husband and met other religious figures like Julian of Norwich, like I already said, who gave her guidance and encouragement. allowing her the freedom of mind and movement she so desperately wanted. And maybe the luckiest of all was Christine de Pizan, whose father was the court astrologer to Charles V, which she parlayed into a position in the court of Charles's son, who became King Charles VI. None of this is to denigrate the tremendous achievements of any of the four women involved, all of which deserve to be read about and studied. And they're fascinating people who did fascinating things. But it's important to know, I think, that simply because medieval women aspired to write or travel, their lives were still tightly circumscribed by, early on, their fathers in childhood, and later on their husbands if they got married. The freedom you were afforded as a woman in European medieval society was largely a function of how understanding your father and your husband were. Family and marriage were, for the vast majority of women, destiny. And it's worth noting the kind of book and the sort of popular facing history that this book is. Despite being published by University Press, Hetta House's prose is really approachable. Doesn't assume any background knowledge about medieval social history or society or the lives of the four women who take center stage, but it is worth knowing that they're all fascinating and historically important. And uh, you know, even beyond this book, there's information out there that you should read and know about, all of them. The material doesn't hew quite as closely to their lives as the subtitle might suggest. It often kind of goes astray to talk about the experience of women in general, but House's sort of conversational tone, really inviting writing, and obviously deep knowledge of the topic all make for welcome digressions as far as I'm concerned. The only quibble I had was within the ending, in which she kind of speculates about what Marjorie and Marie de France and Julian and Christine would have thought about the state of modern feminism. Attempts to make medieval social history relevant to the 21st century or make it contemporary, I just kind of bound to make your eyes roll for me, when none of these four women would probably have identified as feminists. They probably wouldn't have even, the term wouldn't have made sense to them, let alone asking them where the state of contemporary feminism would be. These women don't need Gloria Steinem or Betty Friedan to shine. They are fascinating on their own, and if you leave them in their own century, they're fine. They don't need anyone's help. This is just yet one more instance of a university press. This is University of California Press, by the way, like I said, going out of its way to present material to sort of a broader, like I said, public-facing audience. If you think university press publications are still dry as dust, navel-gazing monographs, that is no longer the case, at least not all of the time. So if you're interested in the social history of women in the Middle Ages, this is a really good, popular place to start. And if you're interested in a review of Christine de Pizan's book of the City of Ladies, I will also link that below, so you can go read that. I read that for Historathon, I think in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, the first year that it went on. This was really enjoyable. Hetta House's Poet, Mystic, Widow, Wife, The Extraordinary Lives of Medieval Women. I'll see you later.